Hello, podcast family. Hope you guys are having a great day. I'm your host, Rocky Rourke, and to today's episode of Design Break Podcast, we've got a pretty hot topic that will likely strike a chord with many of you, as well as probably limit my possibilities of ever talking on college campuses. We are going to be challenging the curriculum and showcasing the ways in which design schools have failed and are continuing to fail their students. So this is an issue that I feel very strongly about, and one that I feel like really needs some thorough examinations. I've talked about it in the past on my YouTube channel, as well as probably in previous episodes of the podcast. And I felt like it was a good time to kind of dig a little bit deeper and share a little bit of new insights that I've found over the last few years. Now, before we jump in, I wanted just to share a quick little hot topic piece. That's what I'm calling these. Basically, I wanted to share that, kind of like a milestone or kind of like an accolade of what's been going on with me personally and with my own freelance business. These are something that I'm going to be sharing a lot more of on these podcast episodes, kind of just to give you guys a bird's eye view into what's going on with me beyond just what you hear throughout the whole episode. So what I'm going to talk about briefly today is just the fact that I'm really excited about how Blue Cyclops, my design studio, is growing. We are growing. We're adding new team members. We might even be doing a call soon for potentially more designers to join the team. And so it's just very exciting news. Recently, and I believe I mentioned this on a previous episode, Joel Anderson joined as one of our new designers, illustrators, and even animators. I'm really excited to have him on the team. He's been an amazing asset. We've now worked on, I think, 3 projects together. And I couldn't be more happy with the amazing work that he's doing. Big shout out to Joel. You already knew all this, so this is probably just a refresher, but I'm glad I could share it on the podcast. The other person that's joined the team is actually my wife, Vanilla Rourke. She is actually our new project manager. She has been working now in that role for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, and she's doing a phenomenal job. It's really exciting to see everything that she has been learning, how quickly she's been catching up on things. And I feel like she's really helped alleviate a lot of stress on my shoulders when it comes to a lot of day-to-day type tasks, project management tasks, and things like that. And I feel like I'm at the point in my career, and especially in the growth of Blue Cyclops, where delegation, like delegating to Joel, delegating to Vanilla, and delegating to some of the other creatives that we work with, it's something that I have to have. If it was just me working in the silo like it's been for years, then I will eventually hit maximum capacity. Versus growing the team and bringing on new people to help out, bringing on other freelancers to help out. That's the way that we're able to grow and we're able to expand without overly expanding or growing too fast and running into a lot of those problems that I've seen at agencies and startups that I've worked with. And so I'm just really excited, and I wanted to share that bit of growth with all of you. All right. So now before we jump in, let's announce the listener of the week. So again, this is something that we're doing on non-guest podcasts where we have a specific listener that engages with us either on social media, on Twitter, on YouTube, or they have left us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts. I actually haven't checked Apple Podcasts in a while. I wonder if hopefully we have some new reviews. Maybe some of you might want to send in a review to become the listener of the week. But this week, and I am going to try and say your name. My wife, she tried to teach me how to say your name, so I do apologize if I butcher it. But this week's listener of the week is Itziana Jimenez. Hopefully I said that right. Thank you so much for being an active listener of the podcast, for engaging with us. She has really gone through and reposted a lot of our content. She's liked a lot of our content, and she's even gone and responded to quite a bit of questions and things like that I share on Twitter via the Design Break podcast at the Design Break, if you guys have not already followed us on Twitter. And like I said, if you want to become a listener of the week, all you have to do is engage with us, share things, repost, comment on our posts, and also, comment on our YouTube videos, or sending us a rate or review on Apple Podcasts. Those are the 3 main ways in which you can become a listener a week. But again, thank you so much. Itziana, I feel like I'm saying it right. Hopefully I am. But yeah, thank you so much. All right. So without further ado, kind of let's jump in to today's topic. So all of this came about recently. I had an enlightening conversation with a fellow designer. I can't think of who it was at the time that I wrote the script, or even right now. So I do apologize. If you're listening to this podcast, please let me know, and I will be sure to add credit to you in the show notes. But we both kind of found ourselves nodding in agreement and really diving in about how our design educations kind of failed to equip us for the real world. You know, both of us had similar experiences with, our respective design programs at our universities, and especially, our experiences with professors. We basically felt that they fell short in preparing us and our classmates for the challenges of our design career. And so, to give you a little bit of context, and I've shared this before, so I do apologize if this is repeating stuff that I've already said in the past, but I graduated with a BFA in graphic design back in 2013. Before that, I started in design as a high school student in, I believe, 2004. That's the first time I heard of graphic design. It's the first time I used Adobe software. So I'm almost at 2 decades since then. And it's almost been 2 decades since I had my first freelance project or freelance client, which was creating, if I remember correctly, graduation invitations. And so when I was in design school, when I was started off in the graphic design program, there was a whopping 140 students in that initial class. 140 students who are vying to become graphic designers, to get into the program. But by the time that we graduated, with our BFAs, the number had dwindled down to only 32. So from 140 students down to 32 students. And, the attrition rate alone speaks volumes. But what's even more telling is that of those 32 graduates, only a handful were truly ready to enter the design world. Years down the line, fewer than a dozen of my former classmates are still working in design in some capacity. And the others, they either couldn't find work because they didn't have the skills that they needed, for the field, or eventually they just drifted to other industries or got jobs doing other things. And honestly, it's really sad to see that. I remember there was a professor that joined our university very towards the end of my tenure at the university, and he did try to point out the fact that these students weren't ready. He pointed it out not just to the students themselves, which he was a little harsh. He was very blunt, which was a good thing and a bad thing. But he also tried to point it out to the art department. Our university had the design program tethered to the art department. And so we were given a very big foundational art background, taking drawing classes, painting, ceramics, and things like that. But they didn't focus on things that were actually going to help us as designers. Art is great. Art is a big part of being creative, but it misses so many points that you kind of need to learn as a designer, as a graphic designer. And we'll get into a little bit of that down as we go through the list and everything. But here's the big kicker. The art department seemed more concerned with producing graduates than with the educational quality that we received. The primary goal was to shepherd us through the program, hand us our diplomas, rather than ensuring, we were well prepared and ready for real world design work. It's very sad. And, we had a lot of issues with our program where our primary professor who was going to be helping us through the program, she got burnt out and she just basically quit on us halfway through, or not even halfway through, a quarter of the way through our final year, or was it semester? No, our final semester of school. She had, prepared all this stuff for us and basically just left us. She got burnt out. And she ended up leaving the university. I don't know if she's still there or if she just took a sabbatical, but she just left us. And the professor, who was very blunt, He stepped up, but he had no idea like what we talked about, what we had prepared for, and what we needed to do. And so both of us, professor and students, we are like basically like, what the heck are we going to do? This is our final semester. How are we going to, do all this stuff? How are we going to accomplish our goals? What do we need to accomplish? So it's just very disappointing overall. So that's kind of like a overview of my experience, or a brief overview of like the end of my experience with my university. And so in today's episode, we're going to kind of touch on a few different touch points. And these aren't like specific in any specific order or anything like that, but we're going to talk about curriculum. We're going to talk about practical skills and experience, which is very important. We're going to talk about industry connection. We're going to talk about financial aspects, which is, I feel like, very big, especially for students. We're going to talk about inclusivity. And then we're going to talk about adaptability. And finally, just like a couple of general pieces about this. But I'd like to also share just like a huge disclaimer. Before we proceed, before I, kind of dog on a lot of design programs, not all design programs or design schools are like this. There are many fantastic programs out there that focus on providing high quality education aimed at equipping students with the best possible toolkit that they can have for success. However, it's crucial that we shed the light in this episode on those that fall short. That the ones that seem more intent on giving students a diploma and sending them, to the wolves, so to speak. So I just want to say that, there are good programs out there. We're not focusing on those. We're not talking about those. We're talking about the programs that are basically just throwing you into the meat grinder and chewing you up and spitting you out, hoping that, they're just collect your money and you'll be good to go. Those are the bad ones. My university, my art department, when I went there, was one of the bad ones. And I hate to say it because I thought at the time that I was getting a good education. The truth is, by the time I hit my junior year, which is when I got into the program, I learned very quickly that that wasn't the case. So, yeah. Some of you are like, okay, he is definitely jaded. I am definitely jaded when it comes to college and universities. So sit tight as we kind of like delve into how design schools might fall short for their students. And whether you are a student, a recent graduate, or a seasoned designer, you're going to want to hear this because you're going to probably want to share, some of these aspects with other designers, especially younger designers. Or you might want to see like, okay, this is a hole that my program might have. Now I can figure out, okay, how can I overcome this? How can I fix it? So like I said, we're going to start with the curriculum. And so I got a bunch of lists here, or a bunch of bullets here for my my script that I'm reading. But the first one here under curriculum is outdated syllabus and teaching methods. So many design schools may still follow outdated syllabi and teaching methodologies that no longer align with current industry trends and practices. In my own case, and I was just talking to a soon-to-be graduate at Creative South this past year, who had, I believe, 3 professors who were all like far into retirement from design. One of them, just like my own, worked in the 70s and 80s, very, very old. I hate to say it that way. That's very ageist of me, but he was very old. And he taught like the old school ways of design using like Ruby Lith, hand drawing everything. And unfortunately, like, yes, that's good to learn for some sort of practice, but nobody does that anymore. It doesn't work that way. And so some of these ways of teaching and these ways of creating are so outdated that they don't help, they hinder students. Now, sometimes it is good to learn how to do the old-fashioned ways, but you should do that in a week, not a whole semester, which is definitely how I think I experienced 2 semesters of no use of the computer, of focusing on drawing and focusing on creating using old school techniques, which was interesting. It was a little bit educational, but it was very outdated. And so a lot of these programs, they have these teaching methods, they have these syllabi that were created 10, 20 years ago, and they're still using them today. And as we know, with all different forms of technology and software and techniques, and especially design trends, those go out the window very quickly. They might have a couple of years where they're relevant, or maybe a couple of years where they stay in one version and then they update to the next version. And so you constantly have to be updating that. And a lot of design programs don't do that. So that's definitely a huge red flag. It's a huge problem that they don't update for their students. The next one is a lack of digital skills training. With the shift towards digital mediums, not teaching skills like using Adobe software or UI UX design or motion graphics, and sometimes even basic coding can be a significant handicap for students. Now, that last one, the coding part, I am not one of those designers who feel like you have to learn coding, that you need to be a developer in addition to a designer. There are people who do that. I think that there's a good idea to understand what it's like for a developer, for like when you hand off your designs to code. But this was a big issue that we had where I think it was junior year, second semester. And by that time, most of the students had never really used or gotten a really well understanding of Adobe Illustrator or Adobe Photoshop. Most of the design classes before then focused specifically on InDesign, which was weird. Even back then, in 2000, we'll say 2010, I focused on InDesign over Photoshop and Illustrator. Just didn't make any sense. And so our professor, the one who ended up quitting on us later on, she came in and just was flabbergasted by the fact that but most of the students didn't know how to use the software. I had previous experience, 4 years of design in high school, and then working for almost a year at a print shop in my hometown. And so I already had a lot of these skills. I knew how to do this. And in fact, I remember the teacher thought I was lying when I said this. And she had me do some demonstrations in front of the class. I'm pretty sure I remember seeing her take notes, but that could be my ego talking. But these are things that a lot of students don't get a lot of focus on, or they don't get focused on it early on. With our program, there's so much focus on art. There wasn't enough focus on design in the beginning, the first 2 years of college. And so what we should have been doing, instead of painting color values or learning how to create jewelry in a 3D class, instead, what we should have been doing is we should have been learning the fundamentals of the software. We should have been learning how to use Adobe Illustrator, how to use Adobe Photoshop, InDesign, After Effects, Premiere, all these things that would benefit us in the long run. And by focusing on it early on in our program, we would have been able to move forward relatively quickly. So then the next one is neglecting business acumen. Failing to include business and entrepreneurial aspects in the curriculum can be detrimental, especially for freelancers or students that are planning to start their own studio. Now, first things, let me just tell you this right now. Do not start your own design studio fresh out of college. Do not start being a freelancer full-time straight out of college. Worst decision, period. You need the time to work in an agency or a in-house design role. Agency probably better than in-house because you learn a lot quicker and a lot faster. But the biggest thing that they don't include here is they don't include, talking to clients. They don't include like the questions that you should be asking. They don't include just mock discussions. It would go a whole long way if they brought in a some sort of business owner or entrepreneur and had them play their role of what they do on a daily basis and act as a client to a student. A lot of universities don't do this. Some of them do. There's a program, and I can't remember the name of it to save my life right now, but I constantly see them at Creative South where they do those types of things. They encourage those types of things. When we were in our final semester with the new professor, he tried to do that with us, but the problem is that everybody, or so many students, were already checked out. They were so focused on building their portfolios to graduate that they weren't focusing on the actual assignment. And so by doing that stuff earlier on, like junior year, that's something that can really help students out. So if you are a student in a design program and they are not doing this yet, bring this up to them. Ask them to start doing mock interviews with clients, or teaching, speech and just like talking to people, or fake meetings and things like that. Those are going to help you so much more in the long run. And then finally, the last part of curriculum is, and this is kind of like what we talked about, a focus on the number of students versus the quality of the education. Some schools prioritize maximizing the enrollment over offering a quality educational experience, with which dilutes the learning environment. So for instance, in those instances where, like with us, we had 140 candidates at the beginning of our program, they should have had a cap on that at the very beginning. There shouldn't have been that many candidates, because at one point, once you whittle it down further from 140, you had, I think, 3 or 4 different design classes going at the same time. Same topic, same professor, just I think it was like 30 students in each class. And so the students weren't able to get the amount of time that they needed with the professor. And mind you, during the whole course of these, time periods, the 4 years, the 3 years, 2 years, whatever, however long your program is, you're dealing with these professors every single day. And at times, there's some professors who don't even know your name by the time you're a senior. That's not good. You need to have more of that one-on-one experience with your professors, and you need to make sure that you can come and ask them questions, ask them how you can improve, right? Don't just focus on grades. Grades are the worst invention when it comes to a college education or even a trade school education. Now let's jump into practical skills and experience. And there's a couple things I'm gonna just like gloss over because we kind of really already talked about it. But the first one is insufficient hands-on experience. Design programs may need to provide more real-world projects and client interactions, leaving students, which without having these, leave students unprepared for actual work scenarios. And so what we're talking about here is, we're talking about those mock projects. We're talking about getting students in front of business owners, startup founders, or even just creating fake projects with real world scenarios. I remember a project that we had. It was to create a product line based on a brand that had nothing to do with the product. So, for instance, my project that I did was I created a coffee line that was produced by Apple. And so the idea was the product line had to have the look and feel of the original brand, the parent brand, but it had to be completely different from what they do. So Apple computers, Apple, iPhones and everything like that, coffee. Honestly, I still the project was interesting. What I created was cool. What did that have to do with things? It wasn't a real world situation. You're never going to have something like that versus, having something where, let's say there is a restaurant in the town that your college is located, and they want you to rebrand the restaurant and all of the different touch points of the brand. Perfect. Real world situation, real world project. If there is a project where you have a massive brand that you're trying to do for a college project, that is the worst possible thing. For one thing, and this is for people who aren't in school or are just building a portfolio, do not rebrand McDonald's. Do not rebrand Apple. Those are not real world situations. Go in and rebrand Mimo's Bagel Shop, or rebrand Taste of Italy, Italian restaurant. Those are the types of things that you want to do. The next part with practical skills and experience is limited software training. And we touched on this, right? Having inadequate training on ever evolving software, doesn't prepare students for what they're going to encounter in their careers. And so you have a lot of universities who are focusing on Illustrator, or they're focusing on Photoshop right now, which back when I was in school, that was perfect. That's what you need to do. Now, though, you have other programs like Figma. That's where you need to be focusing your attention, is focusing on these new pieces of design software. Still focus on Illustrator and Photoshop and design, all that stuff, but focus on the newer pieces of software, and making sure that a lot of times, the software in these universities are out of date. I actually briefly was talking to a student at Creative South. I'm going to keep bringing up Creative South because this is the number one place I have interactions with students. And they were still using software from, I think, CS6 if I'm not mistaken. Basically, whatever the last stage of Adobe Creative, or before they go into Adobe Creative Cloud. And I think now they actually just ended the support for that software, so that software can't even be used anymore. And so you had students who were still doing that, and it doesn't make sense. So you need to make sure that you're up to date on your software training, and making sure that your other students are too. So ignoring soft skills is another big one. So this is communication, this is teamwork and collaboration. That's a huge one. Client management skills are basically all overlooked. Like, even though they're vital for success, in a career in design, a lot of universities don't focus on that. Communication could just be Slack communication. It could be on meetings and calls, like we discussed before. But the other thing too is collaboration and teamwork. The number one thing that a lot of young creatives have a problem with is ego. And especially they have a problem with not working well with others. And I can tell you this right now, as a designer, when you're working in a agency setting or an in-house setting at a startup, you are going to have to collaborate. You are going to have to ask for help. You are going to have to ask for advice. You are going to have to work with other people. You're going to have to depend on other people. And so learning that early on and forgetting the high school mentality of team projects where not everyone carries their own weight, it needs to stop. Like, that doesn't matter. The grades in school do not matter as long as you pass your design classes and and those things. Like, yes, of course, you want to have good GPA so you can get scholarships. I understand that. I'm talking about with design. Don't focus on grades. Don't focus on who did what. Work together. Focus on the end result and what you're learning. That is what's more important. You're learning these soft skills, learning how to communicate to others, learning how to work as a team, delegate different tasks to each other. That is what's more important, and that's what's going to get you farther. The next part is, and this wasn't a problem with my school, but it's a problem with some others, is despite being foundational, some programs gloss over teaching basic drawing and sketching skills, which are crucial for visualizing ideas. Now, I remember many times from when I worked as a branding designer at an agency to working as a UI UX designer at another agency. The biggest thing that I kept hearing a lot of people talk about is, oh, I can't draw. I can't sketch out an idea or something like that. Can you sketch this idea? I'll tell you what to draw. And it's BS. It's complete BS. You need to be able to have some sort of rudimentary skill at some sort of drawing and sketching. It does not have to be the Mona Lisa or some detailed drawing or something like that. It's very easy to share an idea with a client that's just a quick doodle. I will jump in and just grab a sketchbook, grab a sticky note, or grab my iPad and draw something super quick and dirty, super loose. It doesn't have to be pretty. It's about sharing concepts and making sure that we're on the right page. And that's something that a lot of programs just completely gloss over. So don't let that happen. Practice your sketching, practice, sketching out your ideas and everything. And then the final one here is no focus on creative problem solving. A lack of emphasis on developing problem solving abilities limits students' capacity to tackle real world design challenges. So not focusing on creative problem solving is probably one of the biggest detrimental aspects of a design program. And what I'm saying is, I'm not just talking about creating a logo. I'm not talking about creating an ad for a marketing campaign. I'm talking about thinking through a problem that your client or that your company has. So that could be, just sitting down like, okay, we are having an issue converting people on this one specific landing page. How do we fix it? Things like that. Like, that's actually a real world problem that a lot of startups have, a lot of companies have. And so being able to sit there and figure out, okay, what are the next steps? How do we solve this problem? That is very important. And to give you an example of how you would solve that, look at what the landing page currently looks like. Look at how people are supposed to sign up using that landing page or convert using that landing page. Figure out, is there anything detracting? Is the CTA or the call to action super far down the page, or is it up at the top? Like those are, questions that you would use to help figure out and solve that problem. And a lot of times these design programs are not teaching that specific problem solving method. Okay, so now the next part is we're going to talk about industry connection. I'm going to probably go a little bit quicker because we're already at like 30 minutes into this episode, and I don't want this to be super long. So the first one is lack of industry exposure. Again, this goes after the idea that you're not being able to talk to other professionals, other designers, not just talking to startups or talking to business owners, but we're talking about talking to other design professionals, getting the exposure to these people so you can learn, like, okay, how did they get to where they are? What are the things that they think are more important when getting a job or being able to get a job after college? Like those are things that you need to ask real world professionals, because your professors have had their job. A lot of them probably have tenure. They don't know what it's like to be out there trying to find a job in this day and age, in this time period, in this decade. And so you want to be able to ask those questions with real professionals. Then the next one is weak alumni network. So an ineffective or inactive alumni network can impact job placement or mentorship opportunities. Just like with a lack of exposure to other designers out in the field, there are so many people who have graduated from your program who probably could be an easy access for the university to reach out to and ask, like, hey, would you be willing to come talk to the students? Hey, would you mind being a mentor to students? And a lot of times they never reach out. They never ask. They never, see if this is a possibility and everything. And so this is something that should, be done. And it's not being done by a lot of universities, my university included. And now I know for a fact they're not going to come talk to me because I badmouth them at every chance I get. But other designers that graduated with me who are still in the design field, I've chatted with a couple recently, and none of them have been asked to speak or to come visit the university or to talk to other students. That's not good. Like, we need that. You need that as students. And then now the next part is, because I'm glossing over some things that we have already kind of talked about. The last one was going to be no real world practice or experience. We've already talked about that. I don't want to, rehash things we've already talked about. Let's save some time there. The next category is financial aspects. So the biggest issue when it comes to finances with these programs is the super high tuition fees. And not only that, on top of tuition fees, then you have the fees for the labs. You have the fees for all of the materials. Dear God, as an art major, because that's basically what the graphic designers were in my school, they were art majors. You're talking about $500 to $1,000 on art supplies for classes that aren't going to attribute to your ultimate career growth. Like ceramics, sculpture, painting, things like that. Art is good. I mean, I still love art. I still consider myself a bit of an artist, but it's something that just boggles my mind how much we were spending in fees that weren't needed. I remember there was one professor who he eventually, after I left, he became like the head of the art department. I don't know how he did. The charisma on this guy was zero. And he was such a stickler. Like, we were not allowed to, he almost made it to where we weren't allowed to print our senior portfolio pieces in the print labs that we were paying fees for. He wanted to force us to go to like Staples or Office Max to get these things printed when we were paying hundreds of dollars in print lab fees, not able to use the printers because he didn't want us to be using up all his ink, even though he's not the one that paid for the ink. Doesn't make sense, right? So just like the amount of like tuition and fees that you pay as a design student, it's ridiculous. I don't feel like you're really getting your worth out of it. And that kind of goes into the next part, which is low ROI, return on investment. Given how high these tuition fees are, the return on investment is sometimes not that promising, especially when you're considering job placement and salaries, right? So like the ROI on all of that I just talked about, those high tuition rates and the amount of money that you're spending on mat boards or printing, dear God, the amount I spent on mat boards and printing at Office Max. In fact, I even eventually got a job there just so I could pay for my printing. It was ridiculous, what we had to go through. It wasn't until our senior year that they finally were like, hey, you have to let them print in the print lab. They're paying for it. I feel like we should have been reimbursed for all that money. Okay, the next part here is inclusivity, right? Which the first thing is lack of diversity in the types of design taught. So a lot of times when you're looking at these programs, they are so narrowly specifically focused on graphic design or branding or packaging. They don't have motion graphics. We eventually had motion graphics, but it was taught by a professor who didn't know anything about motion graphics. Um, Animation, video editing, web design, and UI UX. Like these are all things that not a lot of design programs are teaching. They're just teaching the basics of design. And what that does is that handicaps the design students to where they cannot continue on, or it takes them so long to get caught up in the real world. And then the next part of this too, the inclusivity, is unrealistic expectations. Some schools may paint an overly glamorous picture of the design industry, leading to students becoming disillusioned. A lot of times, I remember especially like there were times where we would talk about, getting jobs and everything. And so many people were talking about, yeah, like I'm going to get a job as a designer making six figures. I'm going to go move to San Francisco and get a job as a designer and everything. And in reality, it wasn't true. I remember one specific example. I'm not going to tell you their name or anything like that. But there was a student that I went to school with. She graduated the same exact time I did. She was in the exact same classes I was in. And she had that mentality where, oh, I'm going to make six figures when I get out of here. I have the talent. I can do it. And I look back at what she did. She was always late to class. Sometimes she would barely ever show up. The work that she delivered in class was subpar, sometimes even below, way, way below par. It was always late. It was always messy. She didn't put the time in. And 6 months after we graduated, she reaches out to me like, hey, I have not been able to find a job. Can you help me? And this is where Rocky was very blunt. And this was where Rocky was very honest with her. I told her that I was not going to help her. I saw like the way that she acted in school, the way that she thought that she was better than the program, she was better than everybody else there, and she didn't put in the work. And that is the reason why she's at where she's at. And I don't know what she's doing now. I don't know where she is at. I did see her one other time, and I hate to say it, but she was not doing design. She was selling t-shirts at a mall cart. And I look back on that, and I'm not saying that to make fun of her. I'm saying it because it is the sad truth of the fact that this program failed her, but she also failed herself. So everything that I'm saying, this entire list here, is very important, not just for universities, the way a university can change or professors can change, but it's where you, the student, the postgraduate, the professional designer, can find those areas in which you have holes in what you learned or what you're taught, and you can then go and plug those holes, fix those holes. You can figure out, okay, I wasn't taught, how to do web design. I probably should learn how to do web design. I wasn't taught how to use Figma. I need to learn how to use Figma. Like, you have to plug those holes in order for all this to work. And so this actually goes right into the next section, which is adaptability. So the biggest issue that a lot of programs have is they're resistant to change. They're resistant to updating. They're resistant to breaking away from what they've been doing over and over again. The professor that I keep bringing up, the one who joined the department and was trying to help us, he was put into a very bad situation when the other professor went on her sabbatical or quit or whatever you want to call it. And so he tried to fix things. He tried to make things better. And I'm pretty sure he actually was trying to stop some of the students, of those 32 students who graduated with me. He tried to stop them from graduating because he knew that they were not ready. And the design program said, no, they are ready. They went through 4 years of this program. They're done. They're good enough to go out into the real world. That was the biggest disappointment. And honestly, that was actually where I drew this line in the sand where I was like, I don't like my university, especially the art department, for what they did, for how they failed, like dramatically failed the students. And so I went back the next year, like I was asked to come in by that professor to review the portfolios, to give advice to students. But after that, there was no more me going back. And that was not because of him. That was because that program was setting a lot of these students up to fail. One of my friends who I met the first day of college, we were both design majors. He actually, I think, was 1 year actually behind me because he switched his major. He had so much potential as a designer, but the problem was he fell into a lot of those traps that I just outlined, the issues that happen with design program, and he's now a firefighter. There's nothing wrong with that, but he's no longer involved with design. He's now a firefighter, I believe, in our hometown. And so it's just crazy to see stuff like that. And then the last part too, and we kind of just talked about this a little bit, is just the narrow focus of these universities, of these design programs. Not only the narrow focus in a specific area of design, but the focus to do one thing, and that is to churn out designers to go one after the other into the real world and just hope and pray that they're going to be successful. That's not okay. That is horrible. So this is kind of just like general areas. So I'm going to kind of like go over these lightly. The first one is, and kind of this one and the next one go together, limited to no postgraduate guidance or help, as well as limited to just career advice in general. My career advice I got from my professor, I went into her office my junior year, told her that I wanted to be a brand designer, but my ultimate goal was to become a full-time illustrator. And you've heard the story on the podcast where she basically laughs. This is the same professor who quit on us the next year. It's crazy to see like that type of guidance that's being given to students. And I know not all professors are like this, so I'm not going to harp too much on it, but that happens a lot. And the biggest issue is after graduation with some of these universities, especially the smaller ones, or the ones that don't really have a focus on design or art, is there's almost no guidance, post graduation. It's like, oh no, you graduate, we're done. We're not getting any more money from you, so why should we help you out? And it's very sad, And so in those situations, once you graduate, the best thing to do either before you graduate or right after you graduate is try to find a mentor. Find a designer who's willing to give you advice, who's willing to help, give you feedback on things, help you find a job and things like that. That is the best way to combat that limited experience. And I actually, I feel like those are it, because the other ones I have here are just like overemphasis on theory, talking so much about like the theory of design versus actually implementing it. And then the other one too is just like the lack of remote learning opportunities. A lot of universities during the pandemic, they started doing this. Now I don't think they're doing it nearly as much, where students can take courses and learn these other things maybe after they graduate, or while they're still learning, or while they're still going through college, if they can't do it necessarily in an actual classroom event or a classroom experience or classroom environment. There you go. That's what I was looking for. They're not offering opportunities remotely, which is just crazy in my mind. So basically, that's like the whole list here of everything. And this was kind of like brought together. There's some things I reiterate over and over again. But the thing that I want you guys to remember is that as a design student, as someone who's graduated from a design program, as, just like a freelancer or designer in general, you're always going to be learning. You're never going to stop learning. Once you get that diploma and you put it away and it gets cobwebs on it and everything like that, which is what happened with mine, you're never going to stop learning. You're always going to be learning. You're always going to be pushing yourself. You're always going to be wanting to learn that new tool. And you should always be doing that. If you ever find yourself and you're basically just doing the same thing day in and day out, you're never wanting to grow as a designer, that's when you need to switch fields, because you should always be learning. You should always be finding ways of improving your skills, your thought processes, your problem solving, your communication, everything. And that's kind of like what you're doing right now by listening to this episode. So I want to, I appreciate everybody who's listened so far in this long episode and everything. And I really hope that you found some value in it. I hope that you learned something. I hope that, there were times where you weren't disagreeing with me so much. Some of you might be disagreeing with me. If there's any professors listening to this, I'm sorry if I basically call your programs out. I'm hoping that you're one of those programs I said in the disclaimer where you're not doing these things. You are helping your students 100%. I appreciate and I love professors who do that. And there are many out there. I will say that again. There are many out there who care about their students. They don't just care about the paycheck. They just don't care about the security of having a job at a university and everything. So thank you all who are who fall into that category. If you guys would like to possibly be a listener of the week in a future episode, remember to interact with us on Twitter at the Design Break. You can find this episode, the video podcast episode, and other video podcast episodes on YouTube. Just search my name at Rocky Rourke. And we've been posting a lot of the videos, a lot of shorts, a lot of clips and things like that on the YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave comments down below in the YouTube video or send us a DM at the Design Break. I'm always happy to answer questions. But I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And please always remember to stay passionate, stay positive, and stay creative. That's it for today's episode. Hope you guys had a great time. That's it for me. Bye. So that way we can get this all dialed in.